Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of your favorite podcast, The Fantasy Birds. We're back with guest co-host Mr. Tom Hickson today. We're going to get into some team rankings on this very special national championship Monday for all you football fans out there. Let's get into our power rankings for fantasy basketball going into week 4 of the NBA regular season. And at number 14, it's going to be the same face at the same place. Bonafide Scrub dropping another L this week to go to 0-3. A couple interesting moves, however, for Bonafide Scrubs this week, trading Russell Westbrook and Devin Booker. Give me a little insight on this team going forward.
Yeah, so it's pretty clear that he's very discouraged after his 0-3 start. Trading his top two round picks in Devin Booker and Russell Westbrook, he's obviously looking to go into a different direction. Mike Conley and Blake Griffin are a couple of the names he brought in, along with John Collins and R.J. Barrett that he also got from a separate trade. The Russell Westbrook deal was it was a little puzzling to me, just because I think there's nothing more valuable in fantasy, and not just in fantasy, but in basketball in general. There's nothing more valuable than getting that top flight asset, and that's what Russell Westbrook is in fantasy. I mean, he is averaging almost 50 points a game. He's been putting up ridiculous production. Now he has been sitting out some games recently, so that's always going to be cause for concern. But you can see you can see the vision that Bro had when he traded with him. And I look at his lineup, and while I don't see any scrubs, I also don't see any guys that really scare me anymore. I mean, R.J. Barrett has some potential. John Collins is solid. Mike Conley, John Wall, they're solid. Blake Griffin's been a little bit underwhelming, but he's okay. But ultimately, there's some decent pieces here, but the fact that there's no longer a blue chip fantasy player here that can really be a threat to put up close to 50 every night, I think that's why we're seeing this team so low right now.
Yeah, for this team, it's going to be paramount for John Wall, John Collins, and Tobias Harris is the name I'm looking for. Tobias Harris, not pictured here, but needs to step up for this team and average, 35 plus points. Pretty underwhelming week last week. John Wall and Tobias Harris, right around 30 points per game coming in for week 3. So you need that step up. Bonafide Scrub's going to get it going, but just a more diverse lineup now as compared to last week. No more heavy hitters, but more even production throughout. Number 13, we got Sammy Equals Barbecue Chicken. Still at number 13, hasn't moved in a couple weeks. 1-2 going into week 4. What are your thoughts here?
So there are a few names in this lineup that I do think I would not be comfortable starting. I have been a guy that has been forced to start Evan Fournier in the past, and it hasn't really worked, and I don't think it's worked very well this year either. You kind of know what he'll give you. He'll get you somewhere in the high 20s on average, but you're really not going to get much more than that other than the occasional scoring outbreak. Another piece is Larry Nance Jr., who's been really hot in the beginning of the year, but he's kind of tailed off recently and hasn't put up quite the same amount of production. He's averaging about 25, 26 points a game right now in a fantasy basketball point setting. And I don't see him being a guy that can be a stalwart in that starting lineup. So he's gonna need Obi Toppin to come back and give him production when he returns. And as well, he's gonna need a little something more from Robert Covington and Patrick Williams. So, I mean, there's some upside players there, but we'll see. Ultimately, unfortunately, this team is being made and broken, and unfortunately broken right now by Kyrie Irving and his mysterious absence from the Nets. Look, if you would have asked me if Kyrie Irving wasn't going to play because he didn't feel like it, I wouldn't put it outside the possibility. Now, I'm not saying that it's not necessarily I'm not saying that it's not justified, with everything that's been going on, but still, I think that naturally when you're investing such a high pick into Kyrie Irving, I feel like these types of things, and as well as, trade rumors, suspicious injuries, those types of things, I think all have to, kind of filter into the thought process of taking a guy like that. He's been productive when he's played, but he hasn't been on the court recently, and it's really hurt barbecue chicken recently. So yeah, I think 13 is about right.
Yeah, for Sammy equals barbecue chicken, what came down to it this week, he had 8 total missed games. That's going to hurt any team going forward. Evan Fournier didn't play a single game. Maybe a lazy move by the GM here to not change that lineup. But 30 points per game played for this team. So not a very good average when you consider you got top guys in your lineup that like Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis, both missing games this week, I might add. And then Larry Nance and Jamal Murray both averaging 23 points per game for this week. Very, very poor numbers for those two guys. If this team's going to get it going, Jamal Murray's got to go back to how he was in the bubble, because right now, not getting it done. Number 12, we got JR Smoke Circle dropping another game and dropping another spot in the rankings down to number 12. What's your thoughts here?
Gordon Hayward, solid. Pascal Siakam missed some time, but he's been solid. Kevin Durant is coming back. Kevin Durant will be back in full this week. I know he played one of the games last week, so luckily he'll have Durant to come back and give him some solid first round level production. So, and he needs it. Domantas Sabonis has been really good for him. It looks like Delon Wright It looks like Delon Wright is going to be back on the bench where he belongs. I think it comes down to this. Whenever you have to start Brandon Clark and Joe Harris, it's not what you want to see. So, yeah, I think his team has had some really, really good moments, and unfortunately in week 1 when he really popped off and was one of the highest scoring teams in the league, unfortunately he just happened to be playing a better team that week, and we haven't seen JR Smoke Circle be able to replicate the production since then. He's obviously dealt with the Kevin Durant injury that's hurt him, but his team is going to look stronger with Durant back in the lineup, but I still think there are 2 significant holes there with Harris and Clark.
Yeah. JR Smoke Circle getting a James Wiseman and DeLon Wright out of the lineup, both averaging 19 and 17 respectively last week. That's not going to get it done. Pretty poor performance there, and then only averaging 31.9 points per game for the entire week for his team. So 31 a game from all your players, even with a Sabonis doing everything he can to carry the team. Not going to work for JR Smoke Circle. Kevin Durant needs to play. He needs to get this team going if he's going to make a run at the playoffs. Number 11, we have Isla John Brames climbing a spot from number 12 at 2-1. Very lowly ranked for a 2-1 team, but some of the guys in the lineups not huge fans of. What do you think here?
So I see Chris Boucher as a guy that it's a very interesting boom or bust short-term option. We've seen him get 10 points. We've seen him get almost 60. You never really know what you're going to get from him night in and night out. And I guess it kind of evens out a little bit when you're looking at the guys and who's going to be your last starter. But again, there's other than Jokic, I'm really not seeing a lot here that's getting me too excited. Ja Morant obviously being injured hurts him a lot because Ja Morant was balling out in the first 3 games before he got hurt. I'm also a fan of Tyrese Halliburton. When De'Aaron Fox got hurt last week and missed a game or missed most of a game and then came back on a minutes restriction, Tyrese Halliburton has come back in a major way and put up solid production. So I think there's a chance that going forward, Tyrese Halliburton could be a potential option to carve out a role for himself, even with De'Aaron Fox coming back to full strength here pretty soon. So Yeah, it's definitely, like you said, it's still a 2-1 team. It's got Ja Morant injured, and it's still got when it has Ja Morant coming back with the number one player in fantasy, Nikola Jokic. Say what you want about Paul George, whether or not he's overdrafted, but Paul George will give you decent production. A little skeptical about Lou Williams here, but I do think that this is a team that still, even though it's 2-1, can fight for, even though it's this low in the power rankings, it's still 2-1, and I still think that this is a team that when it gets fully healthy, barring any other injuries, I think it can make a run at the playoffs.
Yeah, interesting. Same input as from previous weeks on It's LeJon Brains. Jokic and Paul George are really the only two standouts here, and it prevailed this week. Jokic 55 a game this week when you average his numbers, and Paul George 44. Other than that, everyone was below 32 points a game for the week, even with solid contributions from Boucher on a game-by-game basis. But Lou Williams in that lineup, can't feel good about that until that gets corrected. You don't feel good about this team going forward. Number 10, we have the Milwaukee Wolfhawks making their first drop in the rankings, even after their first victory. But it's going to be a COVID-plagued week for the Pelicans and that team, and that's half their team. Let's be real about it. So, number 10, Milwaukee Wolfhawks. What's your thoughts?
I think there's a lot of inconsistencies here. I'm looking at Lonzo Ball and D'Angelo Russell as two of those three guard spots right there. You never really know what you're going to get fantasy-wise. I feel like Lonzo Ball is one of those guys where the idea of Lonzo Ball is better than the reality of Lonzo Ball, where you see a guy that can produce in multiple different ways and has shown that he's very capable of putting up really good fantasy numbers some nights, and then other nights where his shot really isn't falling, he can't really create his own offense very well, and you see his numbers suffer as a result of that. D'Angelo Russell has been wildly inconsistent, and I think it's going to come down to those two. Chris Middleton, obviously, he started off really hot, but we knew that he wasn't going to keep putting up an average of 46 points per game and being the best wing in fantasy. I think that was safe to say, and he has regressed. When he has regressed slightly. Clint Capela has rebounded from his struggling start to put up solid fantasy numbers recently, though. So you have to be encouraged by that. Ultimately, I think that this is a decent team, and I think Zion Williamson still being one of the cornerstones of his team. I just, you have Trae Young as your top dog, but what I'm trying to figure out is who's gonna be that second guy for him. I mean, Zion seems like it would be the obvious answer moving forward, but we don't really know that quite yet. 35 points per game is nothing to sneeze at, but I think one of the guys on his team, and he has some young guys, so they can do this with their development, but I think he really needs a second alpha type producer on his team to really put him over the hump and talk about maybe potentially advancing the playoffs. If he's gonna do that, he needs another alpha type producer.
Interesting to note out for this Milwaukee Wolfhawk team. 0 missed games this week, very rare in fantasy basketball week setting. But even with that being said, Trae Young, very down week, only averaging around 30 points per game this week. Not going to help you out. And then Lonzo Ball, only 20 points per game. Very disappointing from a guy you probably picked in the 5th or 6th round. Lonzo Ball is really struggling in this new New Orleans offense where he's kind of just an outside shooter, really, if he's not pushing the ball down the floor. So not really involved in the half court, which is cause for concern if you're a Lonzo Ball owner. But, no games missed this week. Probably had something to do with their victory this week. But Lonzo Ball needs to step up if this team's going to rack up some wins. Going to number 9, we have the Black Sheep. He cried about his ranking in the GM. He got a bump up this week. We're moving him up one spot at 2-1. What's your thoughts here?
So are we just going to reward people if they complain? If so, I'll complain all day.
Nah, I think this team deserved a little bit of bump. It was a little bit low in the rankings at number 10. 2-1 squad deserves to be in the top 10 in my opinion, and except if you're the John Brames.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with that because Damian Lillard has been solid. Chris Paul is a very sneaky solid fantasy option, and one of the reasons that Devin Booker got traded, it's a sell low type thing. He hasn't been putting up the same type of numbers that he had in his past seasons. But one of the reasons for that is Chris Paul has come in and become a major part of their offense. Mitchell Robinson, I'm not really sold on. Jimmy Butler hasn't been as bad as he was to start the year, which I don't think anyone expected. I don't think anyone expected Jimmy Butler to continue being that bad. So I think we can feel pretty comfortable that it'll be better in the future in that regard. And also, I am a guy that is very high on Fred VanVleet. I said it in the preseason, but I was really impressed down the stretch last year of how Fred VanVleet was able to establish his own value, whether Kyle Lowry was on the court or not. And I see that continuing in the future. He's got very strong guards on this team. The big men, I'm not really sold on the big men as much. I think that's the real weakness here. I mean, do you have any faith in Mitchell Robinson as a fantasy starter? Because I really don't. I mean, you never really know what you never really know what you're going to get from him. But like the floor is really low on Mitchell Robinson night in and night out. So, I think that's why it's still number 9. I think if you had some more robust production out of your 3 big men spots, I think you'd see them higher up on this list. But I really like the guards. I really like the 3 guards on this team, especially Kemba Walker also on the bench coming back. So we'll see how that plays out and what he decides to do with Kemba Walker.
Yeah. The Black Sheep definitely deserved a bump in the power rankings, not just from the crying. Definitely came out and performed last week. 37 points per game in total from his players this week. That's dominant. That's what you need to do if you're going to be a top 4 or 5 team, compete for a championship. So definitely put it together last week. And it was because of Jimmy Butler and Damian Lillard struggling to begin the season, but both were at 48 points per game this week in fantasy. So those two definitely carried the load. And he just needs to fill in 2 spots, a Mitchell Robinson and maybe even a Jonas Valanciunas, 2 guys that need to step up if this team's going to continue this dominant role. But definitely a good week from the Black Sheep. And that's going to take us to Mr. James at number 8. Not moving in the power rankings, still 1-2, making a trade for Russell Westbrook. That's going to leave him vulnerable for this week, though. What do you think here?
So you're already 1-2, and you're vulnerable for this week, so that could potentially put you at 1-3. But look, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has picked it up a little bit. If we're talking about this week in particular, we don't really know what Ben Simmons' status is. But from everything that I'm seeing, it looks like Simmons is expected to return to the Sixers lineup for Tuesday. Don't know how many games the Sixers have this week, but I do think that's something to keep an eye on. Russell Westbrook also coming in again. I think he got the better end of this trade, trading guys like R.J. Barrett and John Collins for Russell Westbrook. I think those top flight producers are very valuable. I think those bottom half guys in your starting lineup, I think can be quite replaceable, but it's very difficult to replace a Russell Westbrook. Look, I'm not very high on Marvin Bagley. I think he's going to have to find something to do, figure out what to do with Bagley moving forward. Nurkic has also been limited in his minutes, partly because of the role that they want to give to Enes Kanter. But with that being said, at full strength, I think down the stretch this year, it's going to be a really interesting starting lineup with Westbrook, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jaylen Brown, Ben Simmons. He'll still have Nurkic, and I don't really know what to do with those last with those last spots in his lineup. It'll still be a big weakness for him, but I do think he has the top end talent to be able to push for even potentially advancing in the playoffs with that type of talent.
For Mr. James at 1 and 2, this trade for Russell Westbrook, an attempt to correct some mistakes he made in the draft. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander starting to perform as a second-round pick, averaging 44 points per game last week. Ben Simmons, however, not so much, only averaging 32 points per game. If you're going to have Ben Simmons in the first round, he needs to be putting up plus 40 a week, and that doesn't even count the game that he missed. But 33 points per game for this team last week, not really going to cut it. Like I said, you got to be up to the 36, 37 points a week. And a Bismack Biyombo in the lineup last week definitely going to affect that. But you got to fill out this starting lineup, and Russell Westbrook and Jaylen Brown not going to totally correct this lineup. Ben Simmons definitely needs to get it going, as 32 a game, not going to cut it. Number 7, we have Saturdays at 4, Ja Boys getting the first victory of the week. Actually, dominant performance from this team, climbing 2 spots in the rankings. Give me some insight on where they're looking to go.
So, Karis LeVert, the past week and a half or so, especially since Kyrie Irving has missed time, Karis LeVert has been very solid, putting up 50 and 50 plus in multiple games. I think that's very key for him, as he's got some solid guys, Kwai Leonard, Rudy Gobert, solid options. James Harden is going to be that alpha type scorer, a guy that you can expect close to 50 from every night, a bona fide first round pick. I think there's some real makings of a playoff team here, a solid playoff team with some solid top end talent. I like this team, and even though they're 1 and 2, I think even though they're 1 and 2, I've been really impressed with the scoring production that this team has had. Haven't quite been able to keep it together the way that he's wanted it to, and that's why he's also resulted in a couple of losses. But also he did play a 110 team last week that is one of the top teams in the league. So that would be partly responsible as to why he's 1 and 2. But I think this is a team that's going to turn it around. I think this team is going to be firmly in the mix for a playoff spot. Potentially a team that can move on to the next round when it gets there. I think this team can be pretty dangerous.
Yeah, this team definitely looking like they're on the right track to a playoff spot. Top scorer in the league last week, 39 points per game total from the team this week. 0 games missed. That's key. Kwai Leonard did not sit on a back-to-back. I don't expect that to continue going forward. I think that's just a result of him missing a week or a couple games in a row due to that, his mouth getting ripped wide open. So not sure if Kwai Leonard's going to continue to not sit back-to-backs, but Jared Allen and Karis LeVert, in the absence of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, both above 37 points per game this week. Don't know if that's going to continue if those guys get healthy, but for that week, definitely a solid move. Karis LeVert proving if those guys are injured, he's going to continue to put up big numbers. But solid week in their absence. Victor Oladipo needs to get it going more. Only 33 points per game. It's solid, but maybe a little bit better if this team wants to compete for a championship. At number 6, we have Van Gundy's Gangsters, hot risers in the first 2 weeks of the season, dropping here going into week number 4, dropping 3 spots after a tough loss. What are your thoughts on the Gangsters?
So I'm looking at his team, and obviously he's very impacted by the loss of Jason Tatum. He's going to be out. He's going to be out for the next week or so, week and a half. So that's going to be difficult for him. Luckily, he's already built himself up a decent cushion at 2-1. And Brandon Ingram has been really solid as a fantasy player this year, putting up at least 40 in his last 4 games. He's been really solid. So is CJ McCollum. I know as far as the Warriors go, I know that their shooting struggles are very well documented. However, Andrew Wiggins hasn't been as bad as guys like Kelly Oubre, so I don't want to, want to lump them in the same category. However, he still hasn't been as productive as you want from him. He's only averaged 27.4 points per game this year, scoring in the 20s in 6 out of his last 7 matchups. That's not really gonna cut it as a bona fide starter. So if you want to see what they can do going forward, like I said, the Tatum injury is going to hurt because you're starting Hamidou Diallo, and good game last night, but we'll see what that does for his future prospects. But again, I think when this team gets healthy, I think this is a solid team. I like Ingram a lot. I like Tatum. Tatum was actually the Eastern Conference Player of the Week last week, so good for him. A lot of us questioned whether Tatum was worth a first-round pick, but if he keeps playing like that, then it looks like that decision might be validated.
Van Gundy's Gangsters definitely a solid team going forward. Dropping in the rankings due to 4 games missed last week from the Celtics postponements. Brandon Ingram not playing against the Mavericks, that game postponed. Not having Tatum, so you got to expect a loss for Van Gundy this week. But last week, still putting up 36 points per game total from its team. Very solid numbers. You want to be more around the 37, 38, 39 range, but he did miss Jason Tatum for a couple games there, so that's going to hurt. But still looking forward to Van Gundy getting into the playoffs, just maybe a different route as a lower seed with some of these coronavirus/injuries going forward. But still looking good for the Van Gundy's Gangsters. At number 5, we have Dirty Sexton dropping a spot, 2-1, looking good, but you can't be feeling too good about Devante Graham, still struggling, not shooting inside of the arc basically at all. So Devante Graham a big factor in this. What else do you think?
Yeah, Devante Graham was one of the big breakout waiver wire ads. If you had him, if you added Devante Graham last year in the beginning of the season, then you arguably won your league, because to get a guy that would get you almost 40 points per night on that type of production, that's league winning production. But he has not lived up to that billing quite this year. He's, like you said, he struggled inside the arc. Really, he's proving kind of his natural limitations as a player. He's a good scorer. He's a really hot shooter, but he's very limited when he's attacking the basket due to his size. However, what has me more nervous about Dirty Sexton is this COVID situation for the Dallas Mavericks. When you have Luka Doncic, who is one of the best players in all of fantasy, and he's the cornerstone of your team, I think it becomes very important to watch how many games the Mavericks have to miss over the next couple of weeks or so. And obviously those games are gonna be rescheduled, but obviously those games are going to be rescheduled, and he's still a 2-1 team. So this is still a solid squad that we're looking at. But I think in the short term, over the next couple of weeks, it could potentially look rough. Alfred Payton is in the starting lineup, and he's looking pretty solid. He's always been a type of guy that can produce in multiple ways as a fantasy player. So good waiver wire ad from him for the beginning of the season. Bam Adebayo is also kind of catching his stride a little bit as of late, putting up decent numbers. However, he will not be available on Tuesday's game, so that's going to be a missed game right there. Aaron Gordon has been solid as well. Aaron Gordon missed 1 game for him last week, so that hurt. However, with no Jonathan Isaac, he's proving to soak up more of the minutes on the wing and the front court for the Orlando Magic, and that pick I think has been panning out for him quite nicely. You want a little bit more out of DeAndre Ayton. You're only getting about 30 points per game from DeAndre Ayton. So as an upside play, I get it, and it could get better as the season goes on. But I think you want some more production there. But yeah, Colin Sexton, although he's missed some games, Colin Sexton has been pretty solid considering where he's been drafted. 33.8 points is nothing to sneeze at. And I think this is a solid team, and I like where they're at. I like where they're at when they're all healthy and there's no sketchy COVID situations. However, I do think there's some real potential to drop a couple of games here in the next week and a half or so, given the uncertainty of his best players' team COVID situation.
Yeah. Dirty Sexton, Luka Doncic potentially missing some games this week. Definitely got to hurt. This team averaged around 36 points per game total in the games that they actually played. They missed 4 games last week, so 36, a pretty solid number, but that was carried by Luka Doncic above 60 per game. Everyone else was below 32. DeAndre, in particular, only 30 points per game last week. Need that to improve. Potentially a buy low candidate if he can get it going forward. But Devante Graham and DeAndre Ayton holding this team back from being one of the powerhouses of this league. They're going to need to change things up if this team's going to get it going. At number 4, we have the Fig Newtons, the only undefeated team remaining, dropping 3 spots in the power rankings. It's due to a number of issues with this team. 3 starters last week averaging under 30 points, most notably De'Aaron Fox. Game missed here and there, or for him, he left early in the game, so that's definitely going to affect him. But under 30 points for De'Aaron Fox. And then having to start a Justin Holiday and Dylan Brooks going forward, going to hurt the team. What's your thoughts on this Fig Newton lineup?
So I understand. I understand why the Fig Newtons are dropping, and I kind of expected it, to be honest. Listen, De'Aaron Fox with the injury last week, he scored 5 points in the first quarter and then missed the rest of the game. And then when he came back, he was on a minutes restriction, so that kind of hurt his production throughout the rest of the week. Given that I hold my team to that I consider this a tier 1 team, like one of the top 3 teams in this league. Last week was disappointing by my standards. Rolled the dice a little bit on Malik Beasley that had mixed results. Ultimately, I think it went fine, but I think it did have some mixed results. And also, there were a couple of dud games here and there, couple of untimely missed games, but I couldn't really complain about it too much. All things considered. I still think that this is a really good team, and that this is going to be one of the last teams standing eventually. However, at the moment, I'm currently waiting on just biding my time, waiting for guys like Jaren Jackson Jr. and Alec Burks to come back to help me potentially round out my starting lineup. Kellen Johnson has been solid, but he has scoring 30 points in pretty much every game except for 2 recently. But he's also come out and have a couple of 12-point games, which hurts his average. Addressing the Justin Holiday starting again. The reason why I'm starting Justin Holiday is because ultimately I considered starting Eric Bledsoe this week because he had 4 games. That 4 games turned to 3 when the Pelicans-Mavs game got rescheduled. And actually, Justin Holiday has 5 games this week. So if we're going up, I'm going with the bites at the apple strategy here. I'm going to start Holiday, knowing he's not the high upside guy that you want, but 5 games, hopefully that'll get me around 110 points, which is good enough for my last starting spot essentially. And I'm just going to keep. I'm going to hope for a De'Aaron Fox bounce back and Andre Drummond and LeBron James to kind of continue the solid production that they've had. I will say, as far as the regular season goes, I do think that this team is going to stand at the top of the actual standings for a while. Just in terms of, I think it was very encouraging how I beat 3 really good teams to start. I beat 3 really good teams. Actually, I beat all 3 teams ahead of me in the power rankings. I've beaten all 3 of them so far, and so now I'm facing an 0-3 team this week, and my schedule is going to be a little bit lighter moving forward. So yeah, I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to it. I'm just gonna, my team is solid, but yeah, definitely had a down week last week. And while I wouldn't necessarily drop the Fig Newtons to 4 necessarily, I do. I would also say that even though I did win against one of the best teams in the league and still 3-0, that I wouldn't put my team number 1 either. So I was expecting a drop, and if I was being honest, we can save it, but I'd probably put a different team at number 1.
For this team, very important to point out, only 32.8 points per game in total. And when you combine all the players this week, 32.8 is very near the bottom of the league, especially when you consider only one game did a player leave early and only one missed game for this team the entire week. So 32.8, definitely probably around 12 to 11 in our power rankings, if we're being honest. But this team should get it right, should get it going forward, back on track. So only drop it to number 4 for the Fig Newtons, still at 3-0, so got to show some respect there. Going to number 3, we have Forever 110 coming off a loss, but guys are getting healthy for this team. 2-1 going forward. Looking a little bit stronger with the Karl-Anthony Towns coming back from a wrist injury. Only 2 games this week, which is going to hurt, but Forever 110 jumping 2 spots, even after a loss to number 3. What's your thoughts?
To be honest, I think this is a little low for 110. If Karl-Anthony Towns is healthy, you still have Bradley Beal. Nikola Vucevic has been a revelation. So is Julius Randle. You add in Devin Booker to this squad, and you have 5 potentially really good producers on this team. The sixth spot is a little tough, but I still feel like you could go either way with LaMelo Ball or LaMarcus Aldridge. But I think at full strength, if we're just talking about which team is the most dangerous, I think this could potentially be the number 1 team in the league, just because when you look at Markelle Fultz blowing out his knee midway through the week, he missed a game from Bradley Beal, he missed a game from Blake Griffin on Monday night, and yet he still even though I had a bad week, he still had a very solid chance of beating me last week. And so I think that's more of a testament to how well his top guys played, and I think that's more sustainable long term. I think when you swing for the fences and you trade for a guy like Devin Booker, you sacrifice some of the bottom, half of your starting lineup, some of your bench potentially. But I think that's a sacrifice you got to be willing to make. And this is maybe I'm a little bit biased because I was impressed with the performance, seeing it firsthand last week. But this would be my number 1 team, just because I think moving forward, if you still only have 1 loss on your resume, and the only loss came from the only 3-0 team in the league, and you've still got this type of production on your from your top guys in your starting lineup. Julius Randle and Vucevic have been 2 of the best players in fantasy, as has Bradley Beal, and we haven't even really seen this team at full strength with Karl Towns, the actual first-round pick, yet. So this would be my number 1 team, if I'm being honest.
So Forever 110, 38.6 points per game last week. That's upper echelon in the league, but skewed a little bit about Bradley Beal career high points total. He's averaging 58.5 last week alone, and Vucevic above 50 last week. So you got to expect that to come down back to the mean in the coming weeks. So 38.6, very good, but not too confident in that going forward. Karl-Anthony Towns back in the lineup. Hopefully he can get it going. But it's all about health with this team. This team basically has 0 depth at this point. The only 2 ACL tears in the entire NBA, both on this team, Markelle Fultz, Thomas Bryant. Fortunate they go down, but when DeMarcus Cousins and LaMarcus Aldridge are your only 2 guys on the bench, at that point, you really don't have a bench. So if this team stays healthy, look for it to be good. But health is paramount for this team, as there's basically no backups at this moment. So going to be key to stay off the bench for this team going forward.
LaMelo Ball's actually been a lot more impressive in his last 5 or 6 games or so than I initially thought. So I just think that kind of further, and I don't expect his recent numbers to necessarily continue at this rate, but I do think it further. I do think that can always be volatile, especially for rookies, and I do think it further kind proves my point that this is one of the teams. This is one of the teams to be reckoned with, and I think this is going to be one of the teams that you're going to see when it comes time for the semifinals.
Couple buy low guys here for me. Just to add on, Devin Booker averaging below 30 points in fantasy. You got to expect he's going to get up to around 34 to 35 at the end of the year potentially. But if Chris Paul continues to dominate the ball, maybe Devin Booker doesn't get there. So a little bit of a risk there. And then LaMelo Ball, if anybody's trying to sell LaMelo Ball, I'd buy every single piece of stock I can because when he gets the minutes, he's producing fantasy-wise. Kind of like a Russell Westbrook-esque, just putting up on the stats. Not sure how much he helps you in real life, but his passes are incredible. And some of his shot decisions are a little iffy, but if he can continue with the percentage he's got going forward, LaMelo Ball going to be definitely steal the draft for any format. Let's go to number 2, and it's Josh Smooches making a huge jump, 4 spaces up. The number 2 position in our league, maybe a little bit too high, but 2-1 Josh Smooches with a Kristaps Porzingis around the block coming back, which factors into this power ranking. Personally, Kristaps Porzingis probably coming back next week. The reason I got him at number 2, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think with as good as the top teams are, that I wouldn't put him this high just because I want to see what Porzingis does when he comes back, and I want to see a decent sample size of that before I bump him up to number 2. But yeah, I mean, this is I said it a couple of weeks ago, and I complimented some of the picks that he had made through that he had made in the post draft review. I like this team. Like I said, I'm going to continue to preach. Come see the light on Christian Wood. It's a good place to be. It's a good place to be on that bandwagon. Harrison Barnes has actually been kind of solid for him, which has been really good. DeJounte Murray is also a late draft steal that I was personally really targeting. I really like DeJounte Murray, and while he is occasionally prone to a dud performance, I think the total, the average that you're going to get any given night from him is I think that outweighs the occasional 15-point performance. I think you can live with that. Donovan Mitchell needs to improve, and you also wish that when you have an opportunity in the second round to pick another blue chip player, I think Jrue Holiday is still a bit underwhelming in that regard. However, I still think this is a really solid team. You have Giannis, who came into the season as the clear-cut number 1 pick, a steal at number 1, actually. If we want to talk about the quotes, but yeah, this is a really good team. Terry Rozier is still on his bench. He's got some depth. Kevin Love has, you can do a lot worse than Kevin Love coming off the bench as well. I think I'm not willing to put the Smooches this high yet, just because I think the picks of Jrue Holiday and Donovan Mitchell need to show more of, they need to fulfill their draft billing a little bit more before I'm willing to put them this high, as well as I need to see what Porzingis does when he comes back. But I do think this is definitely one of the better teams in the league, and I do think they will get better once Porzingis comes back. Just need to see how well he does to see how high to put him.
Yeah, interesting for this Smooches team. 35.8 points per game in total last week. So decent performance, nothing to get too excited about, especially when you consider 34, 34, and 36 for Jrue Holiday, Christian Wood, and Donovan Mitchell, respectively. So those numbers really need to improve if this team's going to make a run down the stretch. It's going to come down to Giannis, about 48 points per game last week, did miss a game. If he can continue that, and if he plays 4 games a week, this team's really going to need it before Porzingis comes back. But, yeah, I'm assuming Porzingis comes back ready to roll and ready to perform around a 32 to 35-point clip when he comes back. So bumping out of Harrison Barnes for that, just assuming that. So if Kristaps Porzingis isn't able to play as he has in the past, maybe a bump in the future for Josh Smooches. But right now, looking pretty good. Giannis leading the way. Just need a little bit more out of Jrue and Donovan Mitchell. So that's going to take us to our Under Armour All-Stars, climbing one spot to get to that number one team, currently at 2-1. Steph Curry, Zach Levine, absolutely monster weeks this week, carrying him to top 2 point total for the week. What are you thinking right here if you're Under Armour All-Stars?
Well, it's the second week. It's at least the second week in a row in which he has had a top score in the league. So a top 2 score in the league. So good for him for making $20 the last couple of weeks. Go out and get yourself some extra cheese on that McDonald's when you get the chance, because you deserve it. Yeah, look, Zach Levine has been balling. He's been averaging about 40 plus points per game over the last few games. So obviously, his team as a whole was just a murderer's row last year. I mean, this guy, Zach Levine, has just been incredible. Malcolm Brogdon has also been really solid. I was pretty high on him coming into the draft, and I think unfortunately for me maybe, but I was right on Malcolm Brogdon. Joel Embiid, you're always going to have that injury risk with him, but when you get weeks like last week where you can actually have him active for games, it's going to pay off big dividends. Not really, I think he has better players on his bench than Darius Bazley. Obviously, Darius Garland's been hurt, so we'll see about that. But we'll see what he's willing to do about Garland. But ultimately, he hit on the Jeremy Grant pick. It was a little skeptical when we picked it. When he picked him, not gonna lie, but it looks like so far he's been validated on that selection. This is a really good team. There aren't any significant holes. Not to mention that Steph Curry is the most explosive scorer night in and night out in basketball. So you're always going to get that threat with him. This to me, this would be my slight number 2 team in the league, behind 110 if I was in my own rankings. But again, this team, the way that this team played last week, I understand why. I understand why he's reclaimed his preseason spot at number 1. I mean, it's impossible. It's impossible to beat. I don't care who you have. It's impossible to beat a team when they play as well as White did last week.
I'm glad you mentioned it. Preseason number 1, getting back to that spot after a couple weeks in the number 2 to 3 position. 41 points per game last week from this team, by far the best in the league. And like I said, you got to be around 38 to 39 to really compete with the big dogs, and he blew it out of the water last week, 41. And every single person on this team was above 41 except for Mason Plumlee in the lineup last week. So definitely hurt him there. But Jay Grant, definitely the steal of the draft. We kind of talked about it pre-draft that he was going to be a sneaky player. Didn't expect him to put up these kind of numbers. But Jeremiah Grant's putting up 41 a game. You're going to be looking solid. And Malcolm Brogdon, you can't overlook this pick. 53 last week per game. Absolutely huge numbers for Malcolm Brogdon. That's overlooking at Steph Curry and Zach Levine, what they did. No telling, much over 40 a game. So this team definitely deserved it after this week. I believe 2 weeks in a row, putting up absolutely huge numbers. Joel Embiid, you got to stay healthy for him. But if you're Under Armour All-Stars, I don't see why you're not 100% confident coming down the stretch, making some money down there. But that is going to wrap it up for the Fantasy Birds. We are glad you came for another Power Rankings episode, and we will see you guys next week with another pod.